since early on, I had, a relatively negative kind of diagnosis when I was told I had type 1. I had a few doctors that I always wanted to be, my other job, which was a stuntman for a while. And I'd always wanted to do that. And I was being told by doctors when I got diagnosed at 17, it's like, you can't do that. You have to work in an office, you have to. And I was being told no. And I was like, well, I don't believe you. I don't think that's correct.
Welcome to the Reclaim Your Rise podcast. My name is Lauren Bongiorno, nationally board certified health coach and founder and CEO of Risely Health, where we help people and families impacted by type 1 diabetes take ownership over their lives so that they can transform with more freedom and confidence. Everyone has a different reason to be here. You might be seeking knowledge, support, or community. But at your core, I know that you long for something deeper. You're here for transformation. And that's what the Reclaim Your Rise podcast is all about. A quick reminder before we start the show that nothing you hear on the Reclaim Your Rise podcast should be a substitute for personalized professional medical advice. Please always consult your physician or other medical professional before making any changes to your diet, insulin dosages, or healthcare plan. Hey everyone, Lauren here. Very quick intro before we get into the show. When I tell you you are going to love this episode, it is not every day that we have a professional stuntman who lives with type 1 diabetes on the show. And my guest today, Olly Rowland, is the quintessential example of how we can really reclaim our lives living with diabetes and not have to ever take no for an answer. A little background on Olly though. So at 17, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And at 20 years old, he took his first step into the film world as a stuntman, going on to work for Game of Thrones and several Marvel movies that you'll hear about later on. At 21, he took his first international adventure, driving from London to Mongolia, which flourished into a career as an adventure travel cameraman and was one of the first people in the world to ride a motorcycle into the Arctic Circle in the middle of winter. And then at 24, he started his own touring production company, which led him to moving to Nashville to join the management team for the legendary Dolly Parton. And the rest you'll just have to listen to in this episode because Olly is full of stories. And by the end, you'll really understand why he has branded himself as the Diabetic Adventurer. All right, without further ado, help me welcome my guest, Olly Rowland, to the show, and let's rise. Olly, hello. Welcome to the show, my friend. How are you doing today?
Hello. I'm very good, thank you. How you doing?
I'm very excited for this episode. I was just telling you before you had reached out, pitched a little bit to come on the show, and it got lost in our email inbox. And when I found it a couple of months later, I was like, how did this slip through the crap? I need to talk to him, like not in like 2 months. Like I need to talk to him now because I'm so fascinated by you and your journey. And I cannot wait to pull apart just like how you ended up where, you are in your life today. So we're
Yeah,
gonna dive into it all.
brilliant.
All right. So let's start with the signature question that I ask everyone who comes on the show. Olly, can you tell us a story of a time where you reclaimed your rise with type 1 diabetes?
Yeah, and I've been thinking long and hard about this, and I think at the time I didn't realize that that was my rise, but it was after the fact. I was up in the Arctic. I was in Siberia in Russia, and it's freezing cold. It's the middle of winter. It's like -40. Um, and I'm about to start this huge motorcycle trek it's never really been done before, riding a motorcycle in the winter up to the Arctic Circle. And all of a sudden, I'm out and about. We're kind of staying at this small hotel, and I discover my insulin freezes in my pocket because it's that cold outside. I'm like, oh, this isn't great, because I'm going to be out camping in this for like 2 weeks. So um, I had to figure out how to adapt and kind of overcome this issue. So, well, I'm not going, but I also need my insulin. So I kind of went and found some thermometers, and I spent a day just out wandering around with different thermometers in different layers of my clothing to see where kind of the key position was for insulin, where it wasn't going to get too hot or get ruined or anything like that, but wasn't going to freeze either, and kind of just have to adapt and overcome. And I think that is a kind of key moment for me where everything is doable. I'm literally riding to one of the most inhospitable places on earth and figuring out how to do it with type 1 and not mess up. And that little piece of adapting and overcoming, I think, is a kind of good underlying story for kind of everything I've done in my life. And that's kind of the key moment for me.
So, from what I understand, you were the first person in the world to ride a motorcycle to the Arctic Circle in the in the middle of winter. How, like, why? What made you want to do that?
It's a quite a long story. So I got into adventuring in 2009. I drove from London to Mongolia in an old beat up car with a company in the UK called the Adventurists, who set up these kind of adventure experiences. And basically, they give you a launch party and a finish party, but everything in the middle you do yourself. You just figure it out. There's no route. There's no map. It's just you go where you want to go, and we'll see you at the end. And we finished that, and I was in the bar chatting to the owner of the company, and I said, "Oh, you should really do a motorcycle one." I'd been doing a lot of motocross and a lot of motorcycle riding, and he said, "Well, I'm thinking of something, but would you be up for testing it?" I said, "Well, yeah, just call me." And then about a year and a half went by. I hadn't heard from him, and he reached out and he said, "I've got it. You do you want to go to Russia?" And I think it was like 4 weeks. He gave me a month's notice. I was like, "Oh, okay. What are we doing?" He said, "You're going to ride an old Russian Ural motorcycle. It's like from the 70s with a sidecar up the frozen River Ob up to the Arctic Circle in the middle of winter. You got a camp. We can't find anyone that's done this before. There's going to be a few of you going." And we'll just see what happens. I'm like, okay, I'm in, and that's how it came about.
Wow. So, would you say with your type 1 diabetes, you're the kind of person where like you say yes and then you figure it out afterwards, like with the diabetes part of it?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. I'm an incredibly stubborn person, and so I don't like saying no to anything if it's something I want to do. And since early on, I had a relatively negative kind of diagnosis when I was told I had type one. I had a few doctors that 'cause always wanted to be my other job, which was a stuntman for a while, and I'd always wanted to do that. And I was being told by doctors when I got diagnosed at 17, it's like, you can't do that. You have to work in an office. You have to, and I was being told no. And I was like, well, I don't believe you. I don't think that's correct. And that was always my kind of the red flag to a bull. I was like, well, hold my beer. Well, I'm gonna go do I'm gonna go do this and figure this out. Um, and so yeah, I've never really said no and just found ways to adapt and overcome every little obstacle and figure it out. And it's without making it kind of hinder my life experiences.
I'm really curious to know a lot of, who we are and how we show up with our diabetes as adults and our relationship to it and our personalities, right? It all stems in childhood. So, what do we have to know about Ollie as with your childhood and how you were brought up, how you were raised, who you were then that contributed to who you are today, the choices and adventure that you have in your life and all of that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my parents, Jill and Brian, they're fantastic. I had a great upbringing with those guys, but really supportive of everything I did. From an early age, something I actually swear by, when kind of all my friends, my young, when I'm young, like 5 years old, they were going off and doing kind of Boy Scouts and things like that. My dad actually enrolled me in karate lessons, and I really kind of got into that side of things. I was quite disciplined with it. Um, and I think that gave me a lot of my life lessons as a child that really helped kind of make who I was now. And my parents have always been really supportive of my decisions. You know, my mum's scared of a lot of them, going to the Arctic and falling off horses and all the other stuff I was doing, but they've always been super supportive. And my dad would take me to karate lessons 2, 3 times a week. I got my black belt by the time I was 16. I was fighting in kind of UK Open Championships, and super fighting fit. And I think that really helped mold me in who I became, as because that's a disciplined area of a sport. And just with the support from my parents, it was really great to have that all the way through. And they gave me enough freedom that I could go out and mess things up myself. And, I wasn't,
Hmm.
being overshadowed the whole time. And I could go and make mistakes and go and get in trouble and go, "Oh, I probably shouldn't do that again." And, and just having that little bit of freedom, it kind of helped me figure out who I was and where I am now.
Hmm. So when you got diagnosed at 17, your mom was probably already seeing your adventure side of, as you were growing up, and then you get diagnosed. What was your mom and your dad's like? What was their understanding of diabetes, and how did that even maybe, and maybe you're speaking for them in this situation because they're not here, but how do you think that they felt about now you have this extra layer of challenge that could really, become a fatality if you're doing all these things and not taking care of yourself?
Yeah, I do think there's a level of naivety as there is, I think, with most people with an illness they're not kind of familiar with. It was actually my dad who diagnosed me without realizing. I'd started doing extra work, excuse me, I'd started doing extra work, like background work in film and TV in England, uh, while I was training to be a stuntman. And I was on set one day, and I just had this unquenchable thirst. And it was literally something I listened to some of your other guests. For me, it was like a day change. All of a sudden, one day I was fine. The next day, my vision kind of went a bit blurry. I had this unquenchable thirst. I kept needing to pee like constantly. I was super tired. And I'm like, what is going on? And I get in the car to drive home after that day, and I call my dad from the car, and I'm like, Dad, I can barely read the road signs. Like, I don't know what's happening. I can't drink enough. And he kind of jokingly said, sounds like diabetes. And it doesn't
Mm.
run in my family. There's no history of it. So he just kind of randomly said it. And I woke up the next day and I still felt terrible. And I'd been up all night peeing and drinking. And so we went to the doctors, and they said, yep, sounds like diabetes, and did a blood test. And the next day got the call, and yeah, we need to start you on insulin. And that was that. And then so I think my parents kind of just went along with it. I've always, like I said, I think back from those days doing martial arts, um, I've always just been like, well, what do I have to do then? Like, there's no point stressing about it or getting upset or anything. It's like, okay, well, what do we do? Where's the insulin? How do I do this? And
Mm.
just, I think I kind of had a level of naive confidence with it. And so my parents just kind of like, he seems to be okay, and kind of just went along with it themselves. And it wasn't really a huge issue. I just kind of tried to crack on and figure it out.
Was there ever, like, when do you remember the first time that like, it really hit you, like, oh, this is a forever thing, or, hey, like, I actually, I can't be maybe too overly confident with this because I'm not invincible and I really do have to kind of watch and be on top of it. Do you remember a time?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it was my in my mid-20s. So I was diagnosed at 17, and I'll be perfectly honest. And I think, kind of separately, I think being honest with this is something I realized is very necessary. I see a lot of people kind of go, "Oh, my blood sugars were perfect today," and I feel like I also need to share when my blood sugar levels are terrible. And it's not. I don't want to give this illusion that all these diabetics that are talking on podcasts and talking, they've got perfect blood sugar the whole time. It's not a thing. And so my teens and early 20s, I was terrible. I was just like, oh, chuck some insulin in, that'd be fine. I wasn't carb counting. I was like, yeah, chuck a bit in, that'll be okay. I hated doing the finger prick testing. This was before the Libra and before the Dexcom. Um, and when I got in my mid 20s, and I was like, why am I so tired all the time? And I'd gone through a stage where I'd started stunt work, and I was kind of embarrassed and didn't want it to affect that. So, and you'd be wearing these kind of ridiculous movie costumes, and it wasn't always easy to be able to give yourself an insulin injection while you're on set and while you're in front of people. And there was this kind of level of embarrassment, so I just wouldn't do it. And I'd watch what I'd eat and try not to eat too much and try and get through to the end of the day, and then wait till I was in the car. And it was a terrible way of acting as a diabetic. And then in my mid 20s, I kind of realized, like, I mean, I had a few doctors obviously tell me you can't be doing that. Stop doing what you're doing. And so that was kind of a realization for me. And it was around the time that the first Freestyle Libra came out.
Mm.
And and that was kind of when I went to the Arctic as well, and I tested the Libra for them. Abbott reached out to me and asked me to test it in a cold environment. So that was when I started that, and I really got my act together and started concentrating a bit more. And I do little things like when I was on set, and the wardrobe department would hate me for this, but I'd have a little knife with me, and I'd cut just a little hole in whatever pants or trousers I was wearing, so I could get to the top of my leg, so I could inject while I was on set. And I stopped hiding it, and I wasn't embarrassed by it. And I'd adapt my costume and make sure I was able to get. And then eventually, some of the costume guys and girls were so great. They'd kind of build a little flap in if they knew I was on the stunt team or I was on the horse riding team or whatever we were doing, so I could kind of just really subtle, just unbutton it so I could get to the top of my leg and give myself a shot at lunchtime. And yeah, so my mid 20s is when I realized I needed to really concentrate and work a bit more on this, and figure it out, and don't be so loose.
Mm. Yeah, I think that shame and that embarrassment is, very, a lot of people can probably relate to that. To me, it seems like you recognized, okay, we have to do something different here. And then as you slowly started to take control of it and did little things of like cutting your, your clothing, and then having the wardrobe team work with you, you're like, oh, actually, this isn't that hard to prioritize myself. Like this actually can be integrated and make me feel better. Did you start to feel like noticeably feel better and even perform better on set? Like, did you notice any differences when your numbers were more in range?
Absolutely, yeah. Like, black and white, a lot more energy, and no lagging, especially in the afternoon. It's just a lot more awake, a lot more with it, a lot more energy in general.
Mm.
I mean, I think we all know when our blood sugars are high, and if they stay consistently high for a minute, you feel very lethargic, and I definitely had that. I'm just trying to fight through it, and it just became kind of everyday life for a while. And then as soon as I kind of really knuckled down and concentrate on it, you go, oh, okay, this doesn't have to be the norm. I can feel really awake at 2, 3 p.m. and not not wanting to go take a nap or anything like that. So, yeah, I definitely felt a huge difference in energy and just feeling better in myself in all aspects.
Yeah, for sure. And that seems like it aligns, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but with timeline, your early 20s was that's when things started to kick off for you as a stuntman. I mean, your roster is stacked, right? Like Captain America,
Mhm.
Guardians of the Galaxy, Robin Hood, Snow White, and the Huntsman. Like how did you get into becoming a stuntsman? Like I don't even know. Like I mean, what was your path to that, and how do you get in films like that? Like what does that look like?
My big influence was James Bond as a kid, and I loved James Bond movies. I remember watching them with my dad on a Saturday. We'd sit down and on TV in England. There'd usually be a James Bond film on in the afternoon or at the weekend. And I would think I was about 13 or 14, and I said, who's doing that? Who's falling over? And we started talking about it, and my dad told me what a stuntman was, and that's where I learned about it. I was like, I really want to do that. And he took it seriously, and there was a big stunt coordinator um, called Vic Armstrong, who's Harrison Ford's stunt double, Superman, the original Christopher Reeve's stunt double for Superman, and he was doing a talk at the IMAX theatre in London, and Dad saw it in the paper, and he said, "Well, let's go and listen and see what he has to say." So we went up to London and saw this talk with Vic, and I was mesmerised. And he was doing this big display on the screen and showing all the different stunts he's done and how he did them and these crazy things. I was like, "That's what I want to do. That's amazing." And so that was that. So then I went and spoke to Vic afterwards, and he gave me his email address, and he was kind of giving me advice on what to do and how to train. And I learned about kind of the equity union that runs the stunt register in the UK, and you have to train in kind of at least 6 out of this list of sports and get a high level at them. And I already had one. I already had my black belt in the martial art, or I was nearly at my black belt in the martial art. And then so I took up scuba diving, trampolining, rock climbing, horse riding, all these different things, and started training in those. And that's when I started doing the extra work because you needed on-set experience. So I started doing that stuff. And then when I left school, when I left college, I started doing. I was working at Pizza Hut to pay for my training. I was just working as a waiter and as a delivery driver just to pay to go trampolining, pay to go rock climbing, and just reinvesting everything in myself. And then I started emailing all the stunt coordinators when I was kind of getting close to having all my sports together. Can I come and work for free? Can I come be the T boy? Can I come help? Can I come shadow? I'll work for free. I get myself there. I get myself home again. I just want to come and get some experience. And then one of them, Steve Dent, who was a big stunt coordinator, had just done Gladiator, and he was going on to the Wolfman. And he sent me an email. I remember one weekend I had some friends around. It was late, and it was at a time in my life where I wasn't checking emails every day, and it was Sunday night, and I just opened my email randomly. I was like, "Oh my god, the stunt coordinator has hit me up and invited me down to Pinewood Studios on Monday morning at 5 a.m." And so I hit him back, and it was literally midnight. It was 11:30 p.m. midnight, and I hit him back on email. I said, "So sorry, Steve, I've just got this, but I'll be there." And so I had about an hour's sleep, kicked everyone out of my house, an hour's sleep, and drove over to Pinewood Studios. Was there nice and early and met with Steve, and that was how I kind of started. And then I worked with him on the Wolfman for a few days, and then he started Russell Crowe's Robin Hood a few months later. And I called him as he told me to, and I came down and kind of worked for free again for 2 weeks at his kind of stunt yard and horse yard he has near Pinewood Studios and in London. And then he put me on payroll, and I started working and learning how everything worked and learning to work with horses and how that works in film. And then eventually through that, I worked with Steve for quite a few years, and we did War Horse and Captain America, like you said, Guardians of the Galaxy, Thor, a lot of the Disney stuff like Maleficent and Snow White and the Huntsman, and I was very lucky. And I actually, I never finished my training. I never actually completed it, because Steve was able to, because of the position he was in, was able to put me on the stunt teams. I was able to do a lot of that without being, fully qualified on the stunt register, like a lot of, most of the stuntmen in the UK are. And so I did that, and then I moved over and started working on Game of Thrones, and kind of did a few other bits and pieces, Exodus and some other movies. And that was kind of my stunt career. While I was doing that, I'd started getting into touring and production, which is a whole nother kind of side of things. But yeah, that was my kind of how I got into stunts.
Fascinating. Thank you for taking us through that. That is, I'm. It's not every day that you get to speak with somebody who's a stuntman, and you forget how big of a role that plays, especially in these movies that are there's a lot of action going on. Um, when you are a stuntman, it how okay, so let me phrase it like this. So I have a little bit of experience with film, and my dad, he's a lawyer but had this like midlife, he owns a law firm, but had this midlife crisis where he was like, I want to be in theater and film and write and all of this. And so he became like a SAG actor in like under a year. Then he wrote and produced a film that like won all these festivals and everything, and he was like on off Broadway and all of that. So through that period of his life, I was on set a lot with him while he was doing those things. And they're long days. Like you're
Yeah.
shooting for a lot of hours. And there are some people who are kind of just sitting around waiting, for that 5 minute scene to be, filmed. When you're a stuntman, is there a lot, like what's the ratio of sitting around waiting versus the actually being on camera and being ready to go? And also when you are doing those takes, like how long are those takes specifically? I'm trying to get a gauge of like with type 1 diabetes, like is there a lot of like you have to know where your blood sugars are at, and then you're kind of like out and
Hmm.
you're shooting a lot and you don't really have access to be checking? Like what does that look like? This episode is brought to you by Omnipod. Many people don't know this, which is why we've partnered with Omnipod to help spread the word. But did you know that if you're curious about trying the Omnipod 5 tubeless wearable system, you can do so with no commitment, no obligation, and even if your current pump is in warranty? Crazy, right? Omnipod truly wants to make it as easy as possible for you to test our new system out and see how great life can be with it. There are so many benefits, my two highlights being that the activity feature sets a temporary higher target for times where less insulin is needed, and it integrates with Dexcom G6 to automatically adjust insulin every 5 minutes. So if you want to get on a pump for the first time, or if you want to have more freedom without a tubed pump, you can see if you're eligible for a free trial by going to omnipod.com/rise. Fill out the quick form and they'll do the work to check insurance coverage for you. You can also view full safety information, instructions for use, and trial terms and conditions at omnipod.com/rise. Now, right back to the show.
That Yeah, first off, they are super long days for sure, and it really is hit and miss depending on what the production is and what they're shooting at that time. There's some jobs where you're there to do one quick scene during the day, and that's it, and you're sitting around the rest of the time. Some of the big movies that are huge budget, they've got you there just in case, and it's a just in case, and they'll call you there for 5 a.m. to get in a costume, and you'll sit around till 5, 6 p.m. in the evening, and then get out of costume, and you wouldn't have set foot on set. Um, and then there's others, especially if you're on the second unit and filming a lot of action, where you're as soon as they start rolling cameras, you're there and you're in front of the cameras until you wrap. So it really ranges depending on what the production was, and it could be a crazy day where you're absolutely so tired at the end of it because you've just physically been active all day. And there's others where you've just sat around drinking coffee and not really doing anything, and that was actually kind of one of the reasons I kind of started moving away from the stunt work. There was one film I was on where for 2 weeks we were called to set, um, and got in a costume every morning. We sat around all day, weren't used, and then when it got changed, went home again. And I was like, is this a little bit of a waste of, could I be doing something else with my life? And I didn't feel kind of mentally stimulated, for me personally. And that was when I kind of started to look at other options and start thinking what else there was out there that I could be doing.
Mm. So before we go on to that like next phase and how you ended up where you are in Nashville now, with the adrenaline and blood sugars, like what were your strategies for managing your blood sugars during those days that you were working as a stuntsman?
Yeah, so I'd always test my blood before I kind of started and got in a wardrobe for the day, and I'd be when around breakfast I'd have lots of carbs to energize and and make sure I was injecting with that, and then lunch I'd always try and be a bit more protein and you know salad based. So if I needed to, not that's the wrong way of phrasing it, but so I wasn't really too much at risk of hypoing or anything like that. I could kind of have that and kind of stay relatively in the range that I wanted to be at. Um, I my worst nightmare was always if I was having a hypo. That was always my kind of fear. So I'd always
Mm.
make sure I had a bag nearby, or if I had pockets in my costume, great, where I'd have glucose tablets and always kind of be prepared for that side of things. Which was something I did go through a phase where when I was really trying hard but not quite figuring it out, where I would hypo a lot. And especially when you're hot and you're running around and like you said, the adrenaline's
Yeah.
running, and that for me, that's one of my kind of triggers is actually heat for going into a hypo, whether I'm
Hmm.
outside and it's a really hot day, that lowers my blood sugars, or when I'm active and working out doing things, that's the same kind of thing. So I had to be very aware of that and kind of prepare for that a lot of the time.
When you say you were afraid of hypos, what were you afraid of?
um Being on set, having a hypo, and kind of like having to walk off set to go and figure it out, it's not frowned upon. I guess it is. I guess really, if you are causing trouble, it's because you're a freelancer. If you're causing trouble if you're holding up, a multi-million-dollar film because if you're
Yeah.
needed and all of a sudden you've got to walk off and go sort yourself out, you're not getting fired, but you're not necessarily getting hired again. As
Mm.
as brutal as it is to say, it's the way the kind of culture is. That's how I feel it. It could have gone because no one wants to upset their boss, and there's a whole chain where it's like,
Hmm.
well, now that person's not getting hired again, and that person's not getting hired again. So that was always the fear, whether or not that was in my head, that was at least the fear. And
Hmm.
so that was what I was worried about, was if I ever had to go and obviously it gets to a point where you need to go and sort yourself out and get
Yeah.
your sugar. But if it was detrimental to the production and you've got 150 people that are there on set, and you've got stuntmen and extras and camera crew and audio and directors and all these people there, and all of a sudden they're all waiting on you because that's it's definitely not in your favor for getting the next job. I would feel like anyway.
Yeah, that's a really tough industry to be in. And
Mm.
for that reason, I think that a lot on this podcast, I don't know if you've heard some episodes, we've definitely talked about it, but there's this fine balance between, hey, you know what? Like, you want to think that people would be understanding and that if you're in, certain jobs, right, that if you are having a hypo and you're in a board meeting, right, and you need to step out for a few minutes, that, you can advocate for yourself and just say, hey, like, so sorry about that. This is why I had to step out. Like, and you would assume that like most people would understand, but I think in the industry you were in, I would probably say that what you were experiencing, that feeling, was actually a very valid fear, because you're right, there are people that can replace you, and they're really not, they're not dedicated to you, they're dedicated to getting the job done. And it's, to your point, a ripple effect and will impact so many other layers if you are stepping out for that reason. So that makes sense. So when you stepped away, and actually before we go on, there's one thing that you said earlier that I want to touch on. When you were scuba diving, you got certified in scuba diving, you said, yeah?
Yeah, I'm a
Was that
I'm a paddy dive master. Yeah.
okay? Have you went scuba diving since you've had type 1?
hmm I didn't start learning until I had type 1.
Okay, okay. So I have to, first of all, I have to connect you with somebody. One of our clients at Risley, he is like a adventure junkie, and he is trying to figure out how to get scuba diving, his scuba diving license. And he was like, "Do you know anybody who is type 1 who has done this?" Because he's like, "I'm so determined, but I don't know how to like monitor and go about doing that." So can you talk a little bit, because I'm sure other people other than him are just interested. Can you talk a little bit about how like you've monitored your blood sugars doing that and that piece?
Yeah, for sure. So It's actually, I mean, it really hasn't been as big a. I understand why there's the associated fear with it, um, but once you actually dig into it, I test my blood literally before every dive, and it's
Hmm.
even better now with with the technology now, and you can see if what way your sugars are going, if they're going down or going up. And I take a little tube of the glucose gel with me. I have it in my BCD in my dive vest, and in case 'cause I mean I'm quite lucky in the fact I can feel hypos, but yeah, I have that down with me, and but I've never, I mean, touch wood, I've never had to use it, but I'm just kind of prepared, and I check my blood, make sure I'm good. If I look like I'm going low, I'll maybe delay the dive by half an hour and have a candy bar or something just to kind of bring me back up a
Hmm.
bit. But that's it. I've never really had any huge trouble with it. I just check my blood before I get in, and if I've got an issue, I deal with it before I get in. There's never really a problem with delaying a dive by 20 minutes, 30 minutes if you need to.
Yeah.
Um, and you're never down there for more really than 45 minutes. So um, as long as you're prepared before you jump in, I've never had a problem at all.
So there's oh gosh, I cannot remember his name, but years ago nobody had run a mile under 5 minutes, I think. And then
Right.
one guy did it, and then within like the next 2 weeks there was like 15 other people who did it, right? And so sometimes you just need that first person to show that, hey, this is possible, and that alone can influence the mindset and the outcomes that other people can have. And so I think even you just sharing that can give other people who are like, oh, I never thought like that could be something that I could do, maybe is going to influence somebody else's belief in themselves that they can do that.
Good, and I hope so. Scuba diving for me is one of the most amazing, amazing sports, and I've been very lucky to be able to do it, all over the world. And it's one of the most beautiful, scenic things to see and experience. And um, as long as you've kind of got everything under control, and you know what you're doing in regards to your diabetes, and you can look at your levels and you understand what's happening with your body.
Hmm.
There's no I don't personally, not I'm a professional medical professional, but in my personal experience and personal opinion, there's no reason why you can't do it, and everyone
Yeah.
should do it because it is such an amazing activity to take part in.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're on MDI still, multiple daily injections and not a pump. Is that right?
I actually, I think since I spoke with you first, I just went onto a pump last week. So
Oh my gosh.
I just started on Omnipod a week ago yesterday. Um,
Oh.
so I've had my transition was I was on daily injections and a Lantus 24-hour injection when I first got diagnosed, and finger prick testing. And then, like I said earlier, I then went on the Freestyle Libre patch, the first one. I tested that for the company up in the cold weather in the Arctic and Siberia. And I used that for many years up until last week, and I switched everything over. I moved to the Dexcom G6 and
Hmm.
Omnipod 5, is it? And so far, I am so happy with it. It makes my life incredibly easy now in regards to not that I lost all modesty when it came to injecting. For a while I was always like super, like, I'll excuse myself and go to the restroom, and then I eventually was like, I'm just going to undo my pants and just put
Yeah.
it in. It's
Screw
fine.
it.
I don't care. But now, just with the it's so good, and my levels are probably the best they've ever been. I'm not getting any spikes. I'm really staying level, and I think it's an amazing piece of technology. I mean, it's essentially a fake pancreas in my opinion, other than programming the carbs in
Yeah.
um, for the meals. But it really is a game changer. I always said the Freestyle Libre for me was a game changer because now I could see if my blood sugar was going up or down, and it helped me control hypos. It helped me inject more accurately. Just having that piece of information, and in my diabetes kind of life, that was a huge stepping stone that helped me improve, keep an eye on my levels and my daily well-being. And now this, I feel, is another big moment where it's okay. Now my control, after 18 years, is the best it's ever been. I mean, I know I can only base it off of a week, but I'm super impressed and happy with it so far. So yeah, I just started a
Incredible.
week ago.
Oh, well, welcome to the Omnipod family. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you.
And you look like you have a ton of muscle on your body. So the pump is going to work in so many great places. Like, I feel like I have more muscle in my legs. So I love putting it on like top of my thighs, but, also like to have it on the back of your arms, like your stomach, your hips. Like, there's just is so many accessible places that you can keep like switching it up and everything. And also too, like, I think depending on what you do with your adventure, like in the future, I feel like if it does involve water, I know there is some, maybe like depths that maybe I'm guessing we can look into it, but like Omnipod may like not go, to or not work under. I know,
Hmm.
and some temperatures. Like I do ice baths frequently, and my ice bath is like 43 degrees, and I think under 41 degrees the pump doesn't stay, like it doesn't work, like the insulin can freeze or whatnot. So there's like
Right.
things like that. But the beauty of it is I've been on a pump for since I was 9 years old, and I've been on Omnipod I think for like 7 years. And when I want to take like a pump break because of like water or just like whatever it is, like you always have shots to go back to, and
Yeah.
because you've been on it for so long how to do it. So there is so much flexibility, and I'm excited that you're experiencing it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, and yeah, again, I'm sure there'll be a couple of challenges, and next time I go scuba diving, I'll need to figure that thing out. But if Omnipod want me to test anything for them, I'm more than happy to take it up to the Arctic and do any of that stuff. But no, I'm super excited with it, and yeah, it's going so well, so I'm super happy. And you're right, I've got my pens if I need them to fall back on at any time. So yeah, I'm really really happy to be on it.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about where you are today. So at 24 years old, so you did the stuntman work for a couple of years, and then you started your own production company and moved to Nashville to join and eventually join Dolly Parton's management team. So what was that transition like for you? What led you there? And yeah, like where are you at this stage of your life now?
Yeah, so it was actually I had a few jobs all kind of at once. So I was a stuntman probably for about 10 years in total. And then about halfway through that, one of my friends, I finished, I think it was season 4 Game of Thrones. One of my friends, Mark Kovic, his band were going out on tour, and he was one of my best friends. He was the best man at my wedding, and his band was going out on tour. I'd not been able to catch up with him in a while. I was like, well, I'll come along and drive the van and hang out and just get to hang out with you for a bit. So I went out there and kind of naturally started just helping out and kind of managing things, helping him, making sure they was getting paid, getting everyone on time, helping sell merchandise, the t-shirts and stuff after the show. And I really enjoyed it. And I fell into this position of a tour manager, not really even knowing that was a job. I'd never had worked in the music industry, and but I really enjoyed it, and the problem solving and the thinking, like I mentioned earlier, that I didn't feel I was getting in the stunt work. I was getting it here, and I was getting that. Okay, I'm having to use my brain and problem solve and figure all this stuff out, and so I really enjoyed that. So I toured and learned a lot with Mark for a year or two, and then I started thinking, well, I'm going to start my own company doing this. And this is all while I was doing stunt work. So whoever called me, I'd go and do that job. And I started my own company. So I reached out to a lot of musicians and artist management companies, and said, look, I'm a tour manager. Any of your artists going out on tour, I can look after it. I can run their production for them. Lighting, audio, all that kind of stuff. And that was it. And I cold called a load of people, and I got a few clients in, and started taking them out on tour, and kind of built my way up. And big band in England called McFly. I did arena tour with those guys. I had an artist who eventually is the reason I moved to America, who performed at Wembley Arena. So I went and did that, and that was my first arena experience. I'd pretended I'd done this thing before, and actually the biggest show I'd ever done was only 400 people. And I said, yeah, I can do Wembley Arena, and
Fake it till
went
you
and did.
make it, baby.
Exactly. That's my motto. So I just, yeah, I can do an arena and just turn up and try and figure that out. And so I was running those jobs alongside each other. All the meanwhile, whenever I had a gap, I'd go and do adventure work, and that the adventure company, the Adventurists, asked me to. They did a production deal with a TV company, and they need someone to go out and start filming their adventures. So I'd kind of go and be a stuntman over here for a couple of months, maybe go and do a tour, and then maybe go back out to Russia or down to Africa or India. I got to travel a lot with the adventure camera work stuff, and film all these crazy adventures. And that's
Mm.
where the Diabetic Adventurer kind of came from, which is kind of how I branded myself in that field. Um, and so I'd take whatever was there. And but the touring and production is really what kind of took off. And during that, I met Dolly Parton's manager, Danny Nozell, who I work for now. Amazing guy. I met him in London. Mark Kovic was doing a showcase for Danny to see if he'd manage him, and we got on really well. I came out a couple of years later. That was 2014. I came out in 2016 to Nashville, met Danny, just saw everything he was building with Dolly and all the great work those guys have all been doing together here at CTK. And then went back to England, carried on. It wasn't the right time for us to work together at that point. I carried on touring, and then one of my artists had a Vegas residency. One of my British artists got a Vegas residency, and so he asked me to fly out to Vegas and set his show up at the Mirage. So I went out there. I was only going to be there 2-3 months, and in the end, he let go of his manager and asked me to start managing him. I'd never done that before, and I told him as much. But we figured it out, and we had a great successful 3 years working together there. And then early 2020, I met with Danny again. I was kind of ready to move on and look at a different, doing something different. And he was really growing everything here in Nashville with Dolly, and he just started building 2 sound stages, big film stages. But he didn't have anyone on the team with any kind of film background or TV experience. And now I had a few hats on at this point. I could do the live music touring and production. I've got the film background. While I was still doing stunt work, I also ran some departments and was department coordinator for like the horse team and stuff on a few shows. So I was very familiar with kind of producing and production on the film side. And so it made sense. I called Danny, and kind of COVID happened. I was like, do I go back to England, or is now the time? He was like, actually, now's the time. We're finishing the sound stages. Come down and see what happens. So I was commuting between Nashville and Vegas for a few months, and then me and my now wife in October 2020 fully made the move to Nashville, and worked here since with Dolly. And I've produced all of her content. Every time you kind of see her on TV or doing a live show, I produce all that stuff for her, and then work with a lot of our other artists as well. Maya and Casey and the Sunshine Band and Megadeth. We've got quite a few artists on our roster, but yeah, Dolly, who my primary focus is on with the production side of things.
Incredible, incredible. Tell me, is now at this point in your life right now, are you in the most routine than you've ever been? Like more like stationary, stable in routine than comparatively to like throughout your 20s?
Yeah, I mean, probably yes. The most routine. It's still every day is different, which is why I love doing what I do. There's always something different, whether we're working with whoever it is, with Dolly, or we're with Maya, or whoever, whatever we've got going on. And I still get to travel a lot. I'm very fortunate in where we get to travel to, and with our artists, if we've got things on. I just got back from England, which was nice. I get to see my family. But yeah, we travel around, especially around the US a lot. But for sure, it's the most routine I've been in. I'm definitely more of a in an office job. Not that I sit at my desk too much, because I'm usually in and around the sound stages and making sure everything's running right and keeping an eye on stuff. But yeah, I would say definitely the most routine that I've had to date, for sure.
Yeah, so still that spontaneity, but yeah,
Yes.
definitely not maybe going every 2 weeks to different continents. Have you run into any other type 1 musicians, performers in the field that you're in now, out of curiosity?
In the field that I'm in now, I've not. I know. I believe it's Nick Jonas. Is it Nick
Mm-hmm.
Jonas who's type 1?
Yep.
I've not met him yet, but I really love that he's a big advocate of he doesn't hide it, and shows off with the type 1, and so I love that what he's doing. I met James Norton, the actor, on what was I doing? It was a BBC show I was doing in the UK as a stuntman a while ago, and he's the same. He's a big advocate for he has type 1, and he's actually where I learned about what freestyle we're doing with the Libra, and he actually introduced me on set to that when we were War and Peace. That was the production. We were filming
Mm.
War and Peace. We were out in Lithuania, and he was an actor in it, and he showed me his Libra, and I was like, that's pretty awesome. So that's when I reached out to the company. It was just before I was going to Siberia, and that's how that all came about. So, but yeah, I love it when the type 1 doesn't hide it and shows look at me, what I'm doing
Yeah. No.
with type 1. I'm on this arena, I'm on this stadium, I'm acting in these big movies, and it's not stopping me doing anything.
Yeah, it's so funny. I'm in New York, and I was in the New York City yesterday, and I was sitting at lunch. I was eating lunch with somebody, and just the person to in my view, her back of her arm was showing, and there was a sensor, and then I followed the wire to her back pocket, and she was wearing a pump, and I was like, oh my gosh, like so crazy. Like didn't say anything because I was speaking and with somebody, and then I go to a restaurant for dinner. And what do you know? Someone with the Dexcom on their arm. And I'm just like, I wonder because my whole childhood growing up, I didn't really, see or know anybody else with type 1 diabetes, like maybe like two people who maybe were like in my like middle school. But I think more people are wearing tech now that it's just like I wonder like how many times I was just like walking, down a street or in a room or in a restaurant where, there were other type ones and I just had no idea and they had no idea either. But with all of that travel, what is your healthcare team like, your doctor? I imagine you have to find somebody who's really supportive and also can be kind of like there for you in a way that they can kind of like on the fly if you're having an issue and you're out of the country and they need to help you with getting insulin because you ran out or something like that. Like do you have, would you say like your healthcare team, you had to find somebody who can support that lifestyle for the majority of the time when you were like out of routine and more like adventuring to all these different places? Or do you feel like you just kind of like are managing this on your own?
Up until recently, I definitely feel like I was managing it on my own. The doctors and things I had in the UK, like I said, were not supportive of my career choices and life choices. Um, but they always came through if I did have that emergency, if I needed to kind of get emergency insulin. There were plenty of times on tour where, I think I had a bag stolen once, which had all my insulin in it for the whole
Oh my
tour. I was
gosh.
up in Scotland, I was away from home, but I can call my doctor and they'll figure out getting a prescription up to the closest pharmacy and getting everything kind of sorted for me. Um, and then, I went through a time when I was in Vegas. I didn't have any medical insurance, and um, it was it was a real crazy time. I actually got my I don't know if I should talk about this, but what they're going to do now. I got I my parents were shipping me my insulin from the UK, and they'd put it in dry ice, and they'd ship because obviously with the NHS and the medicine in England, it's it's free, and I couldn't afford it in Vegas without insurance. So they were shipping me my insulin kind of 3 months at a time out from the UK, and they put it on dry ice, and we'd hope it'd still arrive cold, and as long as it was, then I'd put it straight in the fridge, and that system worked for 3 years. So the support from my family definitely helped me in that part. But no, a lot of it I feel like it's all been on my own, or my family's help and friends' help to kind of keep everything managed until recently. And my new doctors and medical staff care I've got here in Nashville have been fantastic and really kind of digging in with me to figure everything out and helping me level out and you know um, look after myself better. I always, tried really hard, but it was never perfect. Um, and so now, like I said, going on the Omnipod and doing a lot more testing and keeping an eye on everything. And they're supporting me, with the Dexcom, sending all of my information to them so they can review it and call me and go, okay, maybe let's change this now. And, my Omnipod representative texts me and says, okay, let's make this change. And, it's fantastic. It really is. It's amazing. So, the support I've got now is really incredible. I wish I'd had it, 18 years ago when I, first
Mm.
started, but I think it was a lot of naivety on my part. A lot of, the technology wasn't necessarily there then. I wasn't keen on a pump at the time when you had to have a tube or a wire because I was falling off horses or whatever I was doing. I didn't want things that could get caught and stuff. And so now everything's kind of worked out as it should be, and I'm feeling in a really really good place.
So now that you're at this really good place with your career, with diabetes, there's this kind of like resurgence of the diabetic adventurer. What is the mission that you have right now in your life with type 1 diabetes, and I imagine inspiring a lot of other people to imagine what their life could look like without limits?
Yeah, for sure. So for a while in the UK, it was just before I moved to the US actually, which is the reason I stopped doing it. I would go to kind of hospitals, and I was working with JDRF, who are fantastic, and Diabetes UK, and I'd go around to hospitals and kind of do talks about my adventures and my career for anyone, but for children, young adults who've just been diagnosed with type 1 and their families, and the hospitals, along with JDRF or Diabetes UK, would organise kind of a room of people to come in, and I do a talk and a presentation to them and show, you can still do everything. And I wanted to teach that you can adapt and overcome. That was always the underlying story of my whole life and dealing with diabetes. And that it doesn't need to stop you doing anything, and you can do everything you want. And it's not, I will never forget the first doctor that said to me, you have to get an office job. That has stayed in my mind forever. And that was the reason, because I was like, if that's what I was told, and I like to think I'm a relatively strong person, and doing everything I've done is me forging forward. But if someone who doesn't necessarily think like me was told that, and they had this dream of being a race car driver or being whatever it is, and then it just gets crushed by a doctor who's read a book and doesn't have type 1, and they're just reading out of this man and go, yeah, I guess you can't do anything, you should sit in an office because that's what makes sense after I've read this book, and they've got no experience with it. That really frustrates me. And I want to go out and just tell anyone that gets diagnosed with type 1 that it's fine, you figure it out. It's all dealable. You can deal with everything. You can adapt and overcome without it really affecting your life. You don't need to stop doing anything you want to do. It's all there. You just got to be sensible, adapt, and you can figure it out. And that's what I've done with every adventure I've been on, every place I've traveled to, every job I've had. You just adapt, you figure it out, and you get to do everything that you want to do, and you don't need to kind of give up on your dreams and on your aims in life.
You are the quintessential example of reclaiming your rise. And I'm so glad that we were able to have you on today. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Olly. Where can everybody find you, connect with you, and continue to follow your journey?
Best place probably on Instagram at Olly Rowland. I've also got my Diabetic Adventurer account at the Diabetic Adventurer. I always hit back on any messages on there. So anyone's got any questions, wants to reach out, ask me how I did anything like you mentioned with the scuba diving, just please hit me up, and I'll on either account, and I'll get back to you, and more than happy to share any advice. And I'll also, once I kind of get going on, I want to start doing, booking some more talks and public speaking on this. I'll start putting dates out, and I'd love to meet anyone. And anyone's got any questions, just please reach out. I'll come on down.
Amazing. Olly, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, and we'll talk soon.
It's been great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here with me today and listening to this episode of Reclaim Your Rise. To let us know that the episodes we're putting out are impactful, and to help us get our street cred up and let everyone else know that this is something worthy of their time to listen to, please leave a rating and review on our Apple Podcast, send the show to other people impacted by T1D or maybe even your doctor, and share it on social media tagging at Risley Health and at Lauren_Bongiorno. New episodes of Reclaim Your Rise come out every single Tuesday, so make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so that you never miss a beat. Thanks again for listening, and as always, remember, diabetes is a challenge that we did not choose, but one that we can rise above.